Hey, good morning. Today is Wednesday, May the 8th, 2024. And the time now is 11:55. So I am going to talk about South Sudan. Uh, I will focus on two topics in this video or in this program. One pertains to the Sudanese government basically imposing taxes, okay, on companies that are contracted with the United Nations that are doing businesses, okay, or carrying out some kind of activities in South Sudan. Uh, and the other one pertains to the Canadian ambassador, okay, who gave a speech addressing the World Press Freedom Day, okay, in Juba, Sudan. And I am going to remark on his statement. So for this program, I am going to focus on three articles. One is about the speech or the statement by the Canadian ambassador to South Sudan. And the other two articles are about the situation with South Sudan and the United Nations. So I'm going to now read the article's titles, okay, to you. Now, the first article is from Radio Tamazwi or something like that. That's how it is written. So this article, the title reads, South Sudanese deserve human rights, democracy, says Canadian ambassador. Once again, this article is from Radio Tamazwi, and the title reads, South Sudanese deserve human rights, democracy, says Canadian ambassador. And for the second article is a VOA or VOA News article, and the title reads, South Sudan removes new taxes that triggered UN aid suspension. I'm going to read that again. The second article is from VOA News, and the article's title reads, South Sudan removes new taxes that triggered UN aid suspension. And then the third article is from Fox News. And it is very interesting. When I was doing my research and I saw this on Fox News, and I asked myself, how and why is it that Fox News is basically bothering itself or concerned about what's happening in South Sudan relating to the government imposing taxes on businesses that conduct activities in terms of their interaction with the United Nations. So this article, the title reads, UN calls for reversal of new South Sudan taxes that jeopardize food drops. Once again, I'm going to read the article's title, and it reads, UN calls for reversal of new South Sudan taxes that jeopardize food drops. So what I'm going to do now is review the articles, okay? Go over the articles as I usually do, and then I will basically offer my perspective on the articles. But before I do, let me state that the two articles which are based on the South Sudan's government imposition of taxes on companies that are contracted with the United Nations. It is very interesting that these articles, both articles sound the same articles, okay? And this is something that I've been observing, and I've been speaking about it a lot, in that I am reading articles or headlines, okay, statements that seems as if the various media platforms are basically parroting one another's statements, okay? So I'm going to start. Now, for the first article, it is once again from Radio Tamuzwi, and the article's title reads, South Sudanese deserve human rights, democracy, says Canadian ambassador. And I will continue. Canada's support to this country is based on our conviction that the South Sudanese people deserve peace, human rights, democracy, and a government that is accountable to them and responsive to their needs, said Ambassador Lajani. So this ambassador, his name is Ali Khan Rajani. Okay, it is wrongly spelled here. So the Canadian ambassador to South Sudan, his name is, once again, Ali Khan Rajani. And I will proceed. Rajani's remarks also underscored Canada's commitment to supporting democratic values and partnership in South Sudan, echoing the need for collaboration across sectors for a thriving democratic society. So that's not a bad thing. That's good. But also the whole idea that Western countries often stress their support for this and that, okay, in various countries, it is very suspicious, okay? And it is also creating a situation that many Africans are calling for their countries, their government to detach from aid, financial aid, food aid, and various supports by Western countries and institutions or organizations, because it leads to them infiltrating, okay, subordinating and dictating the terms on which African governments run their both domestic and foreign policies. So I'm going to continue. Reflecting on the historical context surrounding the establishment of this new day, Rajani noted the winds of change sweeping across Africa during the early 1990s, with many nations embarking on path towards democratization. Drawing parallels to South Sudan's ongoing journey, he emphasized the relevance of this year's theme to the nation's democratization. Honestly, I am suspicious of this democratization nonsense that the West is pushing. And I do believe Africa needs something that is unique to Africa. One is that, yes, the West may have coined the term democracy, but the practice of democracy is not Western owned. It is in every countries and groups and societies and tribal relations in the world. To a greater extent, if not greater than the West, Africans do practice democracy. As much as democracy is defined as a form of government, okay, established for the people, by the people, or of the people, or a form of government in which the people decide. At least that is the theoretical aspect of it. But in terms of the practical aspect of democracy, democracy I would define then as a form of government for the corporation, by the corporation, and of the corporation. Again, democracy is a form of government for the wealthy, by the wealthy, and of the wealthy. It is a form of government in which the wealthy, okay, basically decide and they do whatever without retribution to the rest of society. So, in terms of the practical aspect of it, democracy is quite different from the theoretical aspect that we see, even in the West. Africans must practice democracy in terms of what and how democracy is relevant to African culture, African practice, African system, and the situation that Africa finds itself in today's world. Democracy is not about vote. Democracy is about consensus. At least that's how I will defend it and also define it. For example, in Africa, we have situation. Yes, many of us may not like it, but situation in which the educated in the society, in the country, or let's say in the household, that's what I mean. The educated, the most educated person, the older person, okay, or the most able-bodied person is given the honor of deciding and is often given the last voice. That is a consensus by our society, our culture. That is a form of democracy. Democracy doesn't and should not mean going out and cast a vote. Because when democracy is about that, which the West often propagate and promote in Africa and the rest of the poor global South world, It creates infighting in government, sectionalism, and destabilization. Because in this case, the West can use one group in a country against the other or the others. And in the process, with their media echo chamber screaming that this or that person is undemocratic. So perhaps you will tell me what you think, but I'm going to continue. He continued, this underscores the importance of a partnership among various sectors of society, with the government at the forefront, alongside the media and civil society. It is crucial that we all work together in this partnership to uphold the values essential for the advancement of a democratic nation. This includes cherishing freedom of expression, fostering civic and political space, and ensuring that these principles are not only maintained but also expanded each day. I will ask, one is, what is a democratic nation and what does democratic nations look or feels like? But then what about the nations, the countries that they destroyed, that they continue to infiltrate their system and subjugate their system? Also, should we consider a country or a government as democratic that, despite the fact that we may see big buildings and lavish lifestyles of the elite, meanwhile, the majority of the people suffer? Should we consider such government a democratic government? Perhaps you may tell me what you think. I'm going to continue. Speaking on Canada's support for South Sudan, Ambassador Rajani reiterated the country's dedication to peace, human rights, and democracy. He underscored Canada's investment in fostering a government accountable to its people and responsive to their needs. The ambassador proudly announced Canada's funding of the event in Juba, emphasizing the nation's commitment to seeing South Sudan's democracy flourish. So, this is one problem that I have with African and Western countries, or African countries' interaction with the West. We have situation where, because they let Western countries fund their systems, okay, it leads to infiltration and corruption of the system to serve Western governments or countries' needs. This is why in Africa, and in this case we are talking about South Sudan, must invest in its local institutions, okay, people. Invest in the youth, the ones who are smart, who are business minded, to start something that could become the next Fortune 500 companies. When you create those companies and you can tax them, you generate revenue. Okay? In this case, African leaders will have to listen to African Fortune 500 companies or African companies and business leaders and elites rather than the Fortune 500 companies and business leaders and elites of foreign government. We listen to other people and not to ourselves or to our own. So now I am going to continue. Rajani also highlighted the partnership between Canadian NGO Journalists for Human Rights, JHR, and a local youth-led organization, Defy Hate Now, as part of Canada's efforts to combat misinformation and hate speech in South Sudan, reflecting on past challenges in funding. Rajani expressed pride in reinstating support based on feedback from various stakeholders, including the media, civil society, policymakers, and the security sector. Expanding on this, he remarked, I hope that today's dialogue, encompassing diverse viewpoints, will propel our broader agenda forward. This discussion presents an opportunity for all participants to contemplate their individual and collective legacies. As leaders or future leaders of South Sudan, What legacy do you aspire to leave behind? What system of government do you envision participating in? Whether as a voter, journalist, public servant, or member of the public, what investment or decision can you make now to realize this vision? So I do like this speech. It's a good speech or statement. However, my issue here is it seems like Western leaders are going to Africa and the poor world or the global south and give these elaborate speeches, which basically are full of nothing but rhetoric. Okay? They present rhetoric to us. But in reality, when an African country or a global south country strive to achieve something better that is not controlled or dictated by the West, they try to shut it down. As much as they give rhetoric, they speak big words, big book. In practice, their interaction with countries of the global south, with African countries, is that of subjugation. So, but what I do think or believe is that South Sudan and other African countries need to invest in their own situation, invest in their locales, okay? Invest in their people, invest in their own institutions, in the smarts, the education, and the children. So I am going to continue with the second and the third articles. They basically focus on South Sudan's imposition of taxes on companies that are contracted with the United Nations. And I am going to read one of the two articles, okay? And I will not read the second one. This basically means that I will read article number 2, but not article number 3, because it is the same thing. Okay? So for article number 2, article number 2 is a VOA News article. And the title for this article reads, South Sudan removes new taxes that triggered UN aid suspension. Once again, I'm going to read. Article number 2 is a VOA News article, and the title reads, South Sudan removes new taxes that triggered UN aid suspension. And I will continue. The UN earlier this week urged South Sudanese authorities to remove the new taxes introduced in February. The measures applied to charges for electronic cargo tracking, security escort fees, and fuel. In its announcement on Friday, the government said it was keeping charges on services rendered by firms contracted by the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. These companies are profiting and are subjected to applicable tax. Finance Minister Awao Daniel Chuang said. So I do agree in this case with the South Sudanese finance minister. Okay? I do believe African countries, and in this case we are talking about South Sudan, they do need every bits of taxes that they can collect, okay, for their domestic improvement. Perhaps there are corrupt leaders in corrupt countries where taxes are collected, the taxes go in the pockets of politicians, which is bad. However, if these taxes will be used, okay, for development, for infrastructures, okay, and for other things, then yes, it is right. Because in this case, if the companies that are contracted with the United Nations are for-profit companies, then it makes sense that these companies must pay tax. Now, the responsibility then is on the side of the United Nations to make sure that in its allocation of budget to include possible amounts that could cover the cost of taxes. Yes, the United Nations is a non-profit international organization. It is the organization of the world that does all it can to keep peace and to help the world stabilized, okay? To maintain human dignity. However, if certain activities are carried out by UN organization, then in that case, South Sudan should not impose tax on such agencies or organizations as relating to the United Nations. However, if the companies, if the agencies or organizations that are contracted with the United Nations to carry out activities, UN activities in South Sudan or anywhere around the world, they must pay tax because they are for-profit institutions, organizations, companies. It is United Nations job to make sure as they are setting their budget, they should allocate certain amounts of funds within their budget for taxes. I don't think that it is fair that companies are in South Sudan or in whatever countries we are talking about conducting businesses and they are not paying tax, especially when these companies are for-profit companies. So in this case, I do agree with South Sudan's government. So I'm going to continue, but I will read that statement again. These companies are profiting and are subjected to applicable tax. Finance Minister Awao Daniel Chuang said. Earlier, the UN Humanitarian Affairs Agency said the pausing of airdrops had deprived 60,000 people who lived in the area inaccessible by road or desperately need food in March, and that their number is expected to rise to 135,000 by the end of May. So we are in May right now. Today is May 8th. In just 2 weeks, we are going to see the end result of this. So I am going to continue. I want to read that statement again, and I will continue. Earlier, the UN Humanitarian Affairs Agency said the pausing of airdrops had deprived 60,000 people who live in the area inaccessible by road or desperately needed food in March, and that their number is expected to rise to 135,000 by the end of May. The UN said the new measures would have increased the mission's monthly operational cost to 339,000. The UN food airdrops feed over 16,300 people every month. At the United Nations in New York, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said the tax and charges would also impact the nearly 20,000 strong UN peacekeeping mission in Sudan, which is reviewing all of its activities, including patrol, the construction of police stations, schools and health care centers, as well as educational support. An estimated 9 million people out of 12.5 million people in South Sudan need protection and humanitarian assistance, according to the UN. The country also has seen an increase in the number of people fleeing the war in neighboring Sudan between the rival military and paramilitary forces, further complicating humanitarian assistance to those affected by the internal conflict. So in this case, I do agree with the government of South Sudan, okay, that companies are conducting businesses, okay, United Nations businesses that are for-profit companies must pay tax. I do get it. In the end, what the UNI is saying that out of 12.5 million people in South Sudan, 9 million people need protection. But at the same time, South Sudan is a developing country. Because its people need protection, don't mean you should deny the government of financial resources that the same government is going to need for development in the country. The United Nations organizations conducting businesses in South Sudan should not pay tax, okay, because the UN is a non-profit organization international organization. However, the for-profit companies or organizations that are contracted with the United Nations, they must pay tax. So the South Sudanese they are right. So, but the last sentence in this article is, it seems as if it is trying to poke South Sudan. You raising taxes on these companies when even your people are struggling or whatever, which in itself is a strong shot. It does make sense. Okay? It does make sense. And also, it is as if they're trying to point finger at South Sudan. That because you are imposing taxes, it is jeopardizing UN mission, okay, to try to help those in South Sudan and those who are fleeing the conflict in Sudan. But then, to be honest and to be fair, every government, every country needs taxes. We need the financial means to take care of the people, to conduct business. In the US and in most Western countries, a lot of the corporations are not paying taxes, okay, their taxes, or they are paying less of their taxes. This basically, okay, it strangles the government. And what does the US and many Western countries do? They borrow money. Okay, in this case, they borrow money from China or from these same corporations, okay, the money banks out there. As a result, we have countries like the United States with about 34, 35 trillion dollars in debt. If everyone pays their taxes and their fair taxes, okay, pay their fair percentage, the government is able to allocate funds to conduct its business. But when you depriving a government of its ability or its function to collect taxes, okay, from companies that are conducting business, it deprives the government of funds. So in this case, what South Sudan is expected to do is to go and borrow money from Western countries or Western corporations who then impose a very high, okay, a very high and painful and disadvantageous interest, okay, interest rates, which in this case, in the long term, doesn't serve South Sudan well. So this is a very interesting article. But also, what I'm going to say here is, as I said earlier, the article, okay, on the taxes that are imposed by South Sudan, both articles sound the same. So I'm not going to read the second article because it is the same text. However, please, I want you to let me know what you think. Please share your comments, okay? Write in the comment box, okay? Share your position on the matter. Share the links with your friends and families. Join the conversation. If you find any information about what's happening in South Sudan, whether you're talking about the government or just South Sudan or domestic affair, and you want a program or video about it, please share with me. But thank you very much for watching The Echoing Voice. Peace.